Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Red Hat Summit in Boston, Massachusetts, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. It has been an absolutely fantastic Red Hat Summit 2025 so far. Myself, producer JT, are here covering the event live, getting an opportunity to sit down with the movers and shakers of Red Hat, learn what's coming down the pipe. A lot of different content is going to be coming on the way to you throughout the next several weeks. Tonight, we're going to open up with Vincent Damon. He's going to sit down with us and talk about security at Red Hat and how that's an evolving landscape in the Red Hat world and what's changed since we sat down with him last year. I'm here with Vincent Damon. He is the Vice President of Product Security at Red Hat. Vincent, welcome back into the program.
Thanks, Noah. Happy to be here.
Thanks for making the time. So I want to start. Talk to me a little bit about Red Hat and their focus on on-prem technology. It seems as though as we're getting into the world of AI and we're getting into the world of everything as a service, companies are increasingly asking their question, where is my data being stored? How is it being stored? How is it secured? And Red Hat, really even before this whole AI thing took off, has always been a proponent of owning your data and owning your own infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about it from a security perspective, how that benefits Red Hat customers?
Yeah, you're basically talking about sovereignty without talking about the cloud, right? So when you're looking at things on-prem, you have the ability to manage all of your own data, secure it whichever way meets your needs, whichever compliance frameworks that you're beholden to, and obviously full control over your data, the infrastructure and services around it, and of course the security posture that you want to take. When you move those things into the cloud, for example, you're beholden to however the cloud provider manages that infrastructure and the security. You can say impose your will a little bit on some of that in terms of what requirements you have on that service provider, but you don't have the same flexibility, at least in my opinion, as you would on-prem where it's fully within your own confines. You basically own your own kingdom and you secure it the way that you want.
Do you find that being a priority for Red Hat customers when they come asking you for products or solutions, that they're interested in running it on their own infrastructure, keeping it off the internet, that sort of thing?
I think for some they do. I think for some it's a cost question as well. Like they want to leverage some of the benefits of the cloud because there are certainly benefits there. But I mean, still even today, do we trust the cloud entirely? And then of course you throw the sovereignty piece into it as well. And it's like, do I trust where that data is being held if I'm from, say, a different country and it's being held in another country that maybe I don't want it to be held there? So I want to take advantage of some of those benefits of the cloud and run some of my workloads there, but I don't necessarily want my data stored in a place that maybe doesn't feel comfortable for me. And I would rather have that data stored within the confines of, say, my geopolitical area, my own data center, so I can secure it and then make sure that I have full control over that data.
Talk to me a little bit about supply chain attacks. I know this is something we talked about, I think it was last year at Summit. How is that threat model evolving? How has Red Hat's response to that threat evolved?
That's a challenging situation still. We still see it. I was actually reading up about another vulnerability that happened last year, a supply chain attack, a white hat hacker this time, so no damage done, but they're still prevalent. I think that we're always going to see some of these sorts of attacks out there. There's always going to be attacks on the supply chain. I think a lot of efforts are being done on some of these upstream repositories for some of these ecosystems like PyPI, RubyGems, NPM, those sorts of things. They're strengthening those places because those are easy places to attack, right? You got your typo squatting, your drive-by attacks, those sorts of things in those repositories makes it really easy. I replace a dash with an underscore and Bob's your uncle, right? So that's very appealing. And so some of the work that's being done in those repositories is genuinely helpful. When we're looking at it from the way that we pull software in, speaking in the Red Hat context itself, we know that not all of our customers get all of their software from us, but the software that they do get from us has a certain expectation around security, right? So we have to take that extra step when we're consuming all of this stuff to make sure that we're not falling prey to some of these watering hole attacks as well. And so there's that rigorous process that we employ to ensure that the software that we're pulling in is okay. And then also making sure that maybe some updates, as we talked about last year with the XeUtils, that some of those newer updates that are compromised aren't making their way into our supply chain.
Talk to me a little bit, if you would. Where do you go for security news? You talked about, you said you were reading up the other day. Is there a particular place that for somebody that's maybe getting into security or getting into the security industry that you'd say, I would keep an eye on these publications, or this is where I go to keep myself current?
Oh, the Hacker News is a great one. Naked Security, IBM Security Intelligence. So there's a few different news feeds. Of course, I read the Register because that's always interesting and exciting. Not always right, but they have some good information that's on there. And I want to know kind of what's being available to others. There's so many different publications that are there, but then I have lots of people who just forward things to me, and they're like, I'm sure you've seen this, right?
Of course I have.
I have now.
Reading now, yeah.
With AI being all the rage, are we at the point now where we can actually start to apply AI more in the OS layer? For instance, we've had antivirus before, which will check for heuristics of known malware and known viruses. Has the industry reached the point where we can start to train models specifically on that and then run in real time on our OS to be able to flag things?
I don't think yet. I think that some of the agentic workflows that we'll probably start to see in the next year or so. Mm-hmm. I think right now, the best place for AI to kind of show up, and I'm not saying that it has, and I think that it probably should, is when we're looking at how do we interpret some of these scanning results. Right, so I mean, you use a case of malware, for example, on the operating system. I kind of look at it more from like the product security side of like developing code or dependency analysis, those sorts of things. If I'm looking at a lot of SAST scans, for example, those things have so much noise. Like most people can't consume the output of these scanners. And so using some generative AI to maybe parse that stuff down, actually tell me what's meaningful, what's impactful, what's a weakness versus a vulnerability. Take that list of your 1,000 findings down to the 20 things that I care about. Because if I'm looking at a list of 1,000 things manually as a person, A, I'm wasting a lot of time. And B, I might not even actually understand what it is I'm looking for. And then C, depending on what that software that I'm scanning is, I don't even know if that's impactful to the way that I use it. And so potentially AI could maybe map all of those things together with the additional context of knowing, I have this application, there's this dependency that I've scanned. Is it even using it in a vulnerable way, or can I just safely ignore it?
So since you brought up agentic AI, I wanted to dig into that a little bit from the security perspective, because this is something, when I've done research, I haven't seen anybody really discuss. And that is, what are you allowing your agents to do? What frameworks or policy systems are in place to limit what an agent can do? I mean, we wouldn't hire an employee, give them access to all our company's data, and be like, just do the right thing. Right. We have policies and structures in place to limit and monitor what's going on. What kind of developments are being made in the agentic space to ensure that the models and the agents that we're using don't go off the rails?
That's a good question that I don't actually know the answer to, but I will state that I think that some of the issues that we have, I don't want to say issues, maybe challenges, things that we have around just generative AI and those guardrails there, when it comes to the agentic workflows, those guardrails are going to have to be even more robust, because now it's just not, I'm asking a model a question, and the guardrail there is saying, I'm not going to answer that sort of question, right? Now it's like an agent talking to an agent. There is no filter. I can't use any human understanding to go like, oh, that was a bad answer. Now I have to train my guardrail to do this. So we have to think about these things in a much more robust way to kind of make sure that, one agent talking to another is like, this is literally the thing that I want you to talk about. So using Red Hat as an example, if I were to say, use something where, I want to like maybe do some configuration things for RHEL. Like this isn't something that we're doing now, but maybe we do it in the future, right? it should really be answering the question in a Red Hat context, right? Because if you're sitting there without those guardrails that say basically, answer this question only if it's pertaining to Red Hat software, right? I don't want somebody to get we were talking about FreeBSD earlier. I don't want one agent to answer it as if you were running FreeBSD when you're actually running RHEL and that's what you're asking the question about, but you didn't tell it like, hey, on my RHEL box, I'm doing this. You're just asking it a configuration question. It's like, oh yeah, you do it this way in FreeBSD. And then the agent goes off and does something entirely wrong, right? Because there is no human to sit there and go like, wait a second, that doesn't look right. That's not what I asked for.
That's one of my concerns that I've had is as the agents are talking to each other, there's the old game that everybody played in elementary school of telephone, of you tell one person, they tell the next person, is because we don't necessarily have a clear observability in how the agents are interacting and what information they're clearly passing to the next agent, it's really hard to kind of encapsulate that and say, don't go outside of these bounds because we don't really know how they're going to interpret the context of the bounds that we've put in place. Right. And from the user's perspective, we have things like SE Linux, but obviously in the AI agentic space, that's an entirely new organization of doing everything.
Yeah, and I think that's really going to be a lot of small tasks and dry runs, and over a hopefully a longer period of time. But even though the space is moving so fast, so I don't know like how much time do we give ourselves?
Right.
Because we're going to have to sit there and see, unlike generative AI, where you can ask it a thing and then ask it the same thing, and you're going to get a slightly different answer every single time, even though you just asked it that thing 5 minutes ago. When it comes to the agentic workflows, you want it to be consistent. Like if you are asking it to do a thing, it is going to do that thing every single time. Like you don't want it to start deciding to do better the next time. Like you want that consistency. So I think it's going to see, does that consistency itself pan out? And then what guardrails do you design around it to ensure that that's what you're actually going to be getting?
Can you talk to me a little bit about the rise of AI and some of the new attack vectors and challenges that poses from a security standpoint?
That one is definitely interesting because what we're seeing is I think it was the curl maintainer actually, was talking about, I believe he called it AI slop, in terms of the number of quote-unquote vulnerabilities that were found by AI in this case, the curl code. And he basically said, I'm not going to be responding to or taking any more bug reports that are generated by AI. Like from human beings, sure, right? You guys have done a great job with that for the most part. From AI, most of it tends to be garbage, and now you're wasting my time. So that's not necessarily a vulnerability that it's introducing. It's a vulnerability that it thinks it's found, and now it's wasting time. Now, it's not wasting the time of the person who ran the AI code to look for it. It's wasting the time of the person who has to validate it. Now, maybe there's a case to be said like, yeah, okay, maybe Daniel should be using AI to validate what the AI provided, right? But I mean, then you kind of get into the circular place where it's like somebody has to sit there and be like, enough is enough, right? The other thing that I think that's going to be really interesting is a lot of the actual AI-driven attacks that are going to be happening. And I think this is going to put a lot of pressure on some defenders to be able to, I guess probably really up their game when it comes to monitoring, right? Because now we're looking at levels of scale that maybe we haven't necessarily seen before, although maybe not because we've had automation around all of these things to begin with. But I think that's where it's going to be, the defenders are going to have to be looking at how do we use AI to faster respond, faster look and parse logs to be able to detect these sorts of attacks before or as they're showing up.
Talk to me a little bit about slop squatting. So for anybody that isn't familiar with the term,
I am not familiar with the term.
So I learned about this recently.
Okay, tell me about it.
So AI hallucinations call for dependencies that don't exist. So attackers have started to create those dependencies. They're fake, but they're malicious. And so now the AI model calls for a dependency that doesn't exist. I create it out of thin air and say, okay, this is what you're looking for. AI runs, right? It has no problems model. So nobody's going to look for a problem because everything ran fine, and yet now you've got compromised code. How in the world do you begin to even approach a solution or a protocol for trying to defend against things like that?
Okay, well, that's scary. Okay, well, now you've opened my eyes to something I hadn't really thought about, because you do have some tools that are generating code. And if you can, I don't know how you can actually influence the model that's, run by a tool, whichever company, right? To basically hallucinate a specific thing that you could then go to, PyPI or Ruby Gems and create that thing that was just hallucinated in advance of the hallucination. Like, I don't know about that. Now, if the AI is generating that dependency on its own, like it's calling for it and then it's creating it. Like, that would be a really interesting thing that I don't know that is happening.
So what I've read on this is that there are certain libraries, for whatever reason, that some of the models that are out there, I'm not going to call companies out by name, their AI models tend to hallucinate certain specific names of dependencies that you might need.
So it's predictable.
People are seeing that these same names come up and they don't exist, and then they're getting creative of, I'm going to go take that, I'm going to go register that, I'm going to make that dependency.
Yeah.
Because as a developer, if you don't know, say JavaScript, and you're not a really good JavaScript developer, your thing is, I got code for my AI, does it build? Oh no, it fails because this dependency doesn't exist. But if it's been slop squatted, and I go to run it, okay, it built, I'm not going to go then check every single dependency. No, you're not, right? Yeah.
Because when you're looking at a lot of these ecosystems, you could be looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of different dependencies, and then dependencies of dependencies, right? So if it is hallucinating something and somebody has predicted that, basically creates that malicious package, the only thing that I can see when it goes to like placing it into production or as part of your code that you're committing, right? You could probably do, code reviews, peer reviews, things like that, to be like, hey, this thing is weird. Have you actually looked at it? But from the thing that's actually scary is that for that developer, right, they just had this AI generated code. They pulled in this dependency, this malicious dependency that it predictably hallucinates. If that dependency actually ran something on that developer's system, during the compilation of that or the test run of that code, before it's committed anywhere, potentially that developer's laptop could be compromised.
And now everything that they do with that laptop is compromised.
Exactly. Then you're looking at credential theft and other things, and those could be really nice pivot points to be like, okay, if I can, this is no different than Bitcoin mining, right? Like, if I can get it to run off your laptop for, an hour before you notice it, like, okay, I'm making some bank doing that. If it never makes it into the production code that goes to your company or a customer or whatever, maybe I don't care so much because there's a whole bunch of other people waiting who are also running it for an hour, and I'm slowly, making money for myself, right? So, yeah, that's a challenging one. And I don't know the way that you would look at preventing that other than the reminder that while AI is pretty awesome in a lot of ways, it's not perfect, and you really have to pay attention to the things that it's doing. I actually was using an IDE the other day to generate some code for myself, and it was using like different Python syntax that I hadn't seen before, right? Because I haven't kept on all the latest advancements of Python 3 and whatnot. And I actually had to ask it, like, what is this thing that you're doing? Because I don't understand it. You have to explain it to me. And I think that people have to really question some of the things that AI is putting out and really look at it in small pieces so that you can look at it. Because if it's spitting out huge chunks of code, the challenge there is going to be looking at it, like, what does this stuff actually do?
The human beings have lost control at that point.
Truly, right? We've ceded our trust to a system that we don't understand.
And
right?
Skynet is born.
The worst
Well, hopefully not.
The other thing that comes into that is you don't know what you don't know. So
Correct.
if the model spits out something, well, if I couldn't have written that myself, I don't know that the model actually wrote that in an improper way and just created a memory leak or some other vector.
100%. And so when I look at that, like, write the code and document what you did. And if it doesn't, like, if you can't understand it, then you have to ask it to explain it to you. And then more often than not, it'll be like, oh yeah, no, I did something wrong, and I'll change it again or whatever, right? And it really is, and this is where I think, like, maybe the peer review, like, don't just blindly push something into your code. Actually have somebody review that pull request or that merge request before they actually do it, and test cases, right? And especially when you're adding in new dependencies, which, interestingly enough, if we go back to the XCutils that we talked about last year, right? Like, that never should have been a dependency for SSH, right? But somewhere along the line, it got added, and nobody questioned it, and we probably should have.
So prompt injection attacks are kind of a new hotness that I've been hearing a lot about. People are used to, if I'm creating a web interface, I'm going to sanitize my inputs. With an AI model, if I'm using a multimodal model that can take inputs of anything, how do we even approach sanitizing when literally anything can be used as input? And somebody, could very easily send an email about, hey, check out this PDF. And somebody's like, well, I don't have time to read a 20-page PDF. I'm just going to throw this in my LLM and say, summarize this for me. But now I've just dropped that PDF into my framework, and I don't know what it's going to do.
Yeah, I think this is where it comes down to those guardrails, right? Like it is imperative that we have very robust guardrails, and we have a really good, clear understanding of the software pieces of what's in the model, right? So, ultimately, at the end of the day, the model could read the PDF. It could be malicious, and maybe it doesn't do anything, but it could be that there's a software layer in between that executes something in there, right? And so the vulnerabilities that we look at when it comes to these AI models is more specific to the code that might be part of those models rather than the model itself, right? Because it may look at this thing and they don't necessarily interpret the code that's in there. There might be like hidden instruction in there that tells it to go do something else, and that's a different story. And that might be, again, part of the guardrails around it and how those things are built maybe more robustly than they are now.
Talk to me about pulling code off of the internet. So you kind of touched on this a little bit from the standpoint of, hey, don't just because somebody submitted a commit to you, don't necessarily take that thing, right? Can you talk to me a little bit about poisoning of models or training data that people are grabbing off of the internet and they're putting into production and they're kind of using it? What do those guardrails look like? What would you advise a company or a person who's trying to figure out how to navigate that?
Yeah, I think it's, honestly, finding a reputable source for some of these models. I know there's a lot of excitement, and I know I've played with it as well, and I'm downloading things and whatnot. And part of it could be like, how do we stand this up in more of a sandboxed, isolated environment? Because we don't necessarily know what it is, and we are running untrusted code. I know there's work being done around model provenance and signing, and I think that that's going to be a huge step forward in advancing some trust in these areas. Like if I have a model that it's supposedly coming from a vendor that I trust, but I have no way to validate or verify that, that would be a lot more concerning to me than if I just downloaded something, I had a signature that I could verify, I knew it came from the vendor that I like or I trust, and then I could run it that way. And I think that doing something like that is going to be maybe the next evolution or the next step in like how do we kind of build some trust into these. Right now, I think a lot of people have really focused on the safety pieces of things, like can the model tell me to do something illegal? Can it tell me to do something immoral, right? And I think that for some of those cases, we have to really clearly draw these distinctions between AI security, which is more around the software parts of it, and then AI safety, which is more of the kind of the humanistic, moral sorts of things. And then I look at it as there's another part of it, which is almost an AI preference or bias, where you're looking at these geopolitical regions where something might be okay in one region and it's not okay in another. Is that a safety issue? I don't think so. But it might be like it's a preference, and we should have a way of being able to describe what those kind of built-in biases or preferences in a model are, so I can make an informed decision.
Vincent Danon, he is the Vice President of Product Security at Red Hat, a guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Vincent, we appreciate the time as always. We'll get you back in the program soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Noah.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of May 11th, 2025, here's the Linux and open source news. Calibre 8.4 is out. Nmap 7.96 has been released. The graphics stack Mesa has announced version 25.1. The 6.15 kernel is taking shape, and it looks like it will eliminate support for Intel's 486 chips and its contemporaries. In distro news, the Japanese distro Plomo Linux 8.2 is available. Ubuntu is adopting the Rust rewrite of sudo for Ubuntu 25.10. OpenSUSE has removed Deepin Desktop from their repos for claimed package policy violations, and Fedora 42 is now an official Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 distribution. In security news, a new campaign employing ClickFix attacks have been spotted targeting both Windows and Linux systems using instructions that make infections on either operating system possible. Unlike other VPN companies that provide a GUI for Mac and Windows but leave Linux users to use the command line, NordVPN has released a full GUI for Linux. And fake AI-powered video generation tools are being used to distribute a new information steering malware family called Noodlefile, under the guise of generated media content. In other open-source AI news, Hugging Face has acquired Pollen Robotics, a French startup that developed the humanoid 2 robot Ricci 2. The acquisition aims to make robotics more accessible by open-sourcing the robot's design and allowing developers to modify and improve its code. The University of California, Santa Cruz has announced the release of OpenVision, a family of vision encoders that aim to provide a new alternative to models, including OpenAI's 4-year-old Clip and last year's Google's Siglip. And lastly, OpenWebUI, a web app for LLM chat, has changed their license to prohibit use of any code without including their branding.
Steve, you had quite the week when it comes to GPUs. Tell me about your GPU adventure.
So one of the things that I have talked about in the past is how much I really appreciate the Arch ecosystem. And a lot of the times when people talk about, they say, oh, well, I've had Arch is unstable, or it breaks all the time, or I'm often having to go and fix something, whatever that is. I've always wondered, what are they doing? Who are these people? I've never seen this in the, 7 or 8 years that I've been using Arch. And I'm sure there's been one or two times in the near past decade where I've had to tinker around with it, but it happens so few and far between that I've forgotten about it. But I also like to come on here and be honest with people, because one of the things that I don't like doing is I don't like sugarcoating things. So this week I thought we'd talk about how I kind of fell down with Arch this week and how it was kind of disappointing. And it starts with, I went and bought a 5060 Ti, and it's only a couple of weeks old at this point, especially if you can't get your hands on it. Like, it was officially released about a month ago, but I mean, supply chain being what it is, what this leads to is, at least for Linux right now, NVIDIA is recommending using the NVIDIA-Open driver. So that I thought was an interesting note. But in this particular case, most of the Linux distributions are saying that you need to be running the beta version of the driver in order for it to be performant. So, of course, I didn't read that ahead of time. What I did was just went and installed the latest driver. So I just actually tried to swap the video card. I have like a 6-year-old video card in there. I pulled it out, stuck in my new one. I was like, oh, well, we'll see what happens. It dropped me to a shell because it couldn't start the graphical desktop. Okay, no big deal. Run the updates on the driver. The proprietary driver, that's the latest, didn't do anything. It didn't even drop me to shell. It stood at the part where it said reached target graphical interface, or whatever that systemd setting is. So it didn't even drop me into a shell. It just kind of sat there, not starting the desktop. So I installed the open version, and that got me to a desktop. But when I tried to launch a game, it was abysmal. Okay. So just to be clear, at this point, all I've done is I've removed the old graphics card, stuck in the new one, and run the updates. And it pulled down the latest of whatever the mainstream driver is. So now I'm starting to read, why is my performance so terrible? And it turns out that you pretty much want to be running the beta drivers at this point if you're running on Linux. And there's a bunch of posts about it. It wasn't hidden. Didn't take me 10 hours to search this out on the internet. But this is really where my story with a less than wonderful experience begins. Now, part of the problem here is it's self-inflicted. Okay, so I've got several things that I've done that made this very much a bespoke kind of desktop for myself. So I'm running ZFS on root. I'm running ZFS boot menu. And all of those mean that I have certain dependencies on the kernel. If I wasn't running ZFS on root, I don't think I would have had any of these problems, because I could have just simply tried to install the beta drivers from the repository and be good. However, they have a dependency on the non-LTS kernel, and it's version 6.14. Version 6.14 doesn't compile properly with the ZFS module that I want. The symbols are missing. This is a known thing that happens quite frequently on Arch, is the kernel rolls faster than the ZFS project can keep up with. And so there's often a lag. That's not normally that big of a deal, except that in this case, I needed the ZFS drivers to run my root operating system, like the root partition. And so it was one of those, well, I can't install the package from the package manager without breaking ZFS. What do I do now? So I tried to install the DKMS module for NVIDIA, and it seemed to do something, except that it didn't get to the desktop at all. I don't know what happened, but when you boot up and you watch, if you toggle on the system messages as you're booting, you can see like a certain font. If the driver isn't working, the font is huge, as if you're running it on like a 1024 by 768 screen. Like the font is really large. And so with the DKMS module, no matter what I tried, that's what it did. I've got huge font and no desktop. And so it was one of those, man, have you ever been at that spot, Noah, where you're just like, I don't even know if this is worth it. Why am I doing this to myself?
Yes. In your particular case, though, I feel like it's a collection of circumstances, right? Like, it's not necessarily Arch. It's not necessarily ZFS. It's not necessarily the fact that you bought a brand new graphics card. It's the fact that you want to do all that at one time, all in one system. And that's where I think you got yourself into trouble. Yep.
I mean, I eventually worked around it. And to be clear, and I think, Noah, you'd been in the same boat. We've got enough experience that I don't want to say it's trivial. It was frustrating, and I cleared the hurdle in a couple of hours. So it wasn't like I beat my head on this for days and days. But the end result was really kooky. I downloaded the NVIDIA run drivers, like the .run file, from the NVIDIA.com website, which, by the way, when you do that under Linux, it pops up and is like, yo, dude, maybe you should check your distribution's package manager before you install this, which I thought was interesting. I've never seen that before. The other thing that's interesting about their driver now is when you use the .run file, it actually asks you whether you want to install the open driver or the proprietary driver. And it tells you the license of each file in the little prompt. And the default is the MIT open source licensed driver, which I thought was interesting. So my first kick of the can was, I'm going to install it. I'm going to let it install the 32-bit drivers so I can play stuff on Steam. I thought, that'll work, right? Well, I got a usable desktop. Everything was beautiful. I'm kind of surfing around after about, I don't know, an hour. I went to play a video game, and Steam doesn't go anywhere. Again. So the issue is that Steam has specific dependencies about the drivers that it has on the system. So in order to remove the packages from the distribution, so I had the NVIDIA drivers normally, right? I didn't want to have the NVIDIA drivers from my package manager as well as the .run file. So I uninstalled the packages from the package manager, which takes Steam out because Steam has a dependency on those drivers. So then I have to go to reinstall Steam, and this time it's like, well, you can't and it just gives like, I don't know, I want to say several dozen files that already exist on the file system because the .run file put them there as I asked it to. And I couldn't really finagle it into installing without doing some janky stuff. So I reverted, I did the NVIDIA uninstall, I rebooted the machine, I cleaned up all the drivers, started again, tried to do the NVIDIA drivers only with the 32-bit or without the 32-bit, then layering everything on top. And the long story short is I ended up with a system where I have some packages from the package manager. I've got some that came from the official NVIDIA driver, and everything is working. Performance is great, and all was happy. And I went through the weekend playing video games, and I thought, this is great. I even thought about getting another one for a separate project. And then today I went to launch something out of Flatpak, and womp womp, a bunch of my Flatpaks were broken. So
So before we get into the flatpack thing, if you can, I'm interested, if you were to go back in time, would you, assuming that you could do this without an incredible amount of hassle to your life, because in the end, let's not forget, you're picking the problems you want to solve, right? Windows produced an update in which it upgraded everybody's Windows server to, I think it was 2025, but then if you didn't have a license for 2025, you were running unlicensed software, and there was no way to roll back, and so it was this huge catastrophe that hit the IT industry, this, I think, a few months ago. I mean, it's not like the other platforms are a whole lot better. They have problems too. Their problems are just more egregious, and there aren't friendly nerds on the internet willing to help you. So with all of that in mind, if you were to go back and you were to change one ingredient to the recipe, would it be Arch? Would you wait a little bit longer before you switch the graphics card? Could you live without ZFS? What one of those ingredients are, I'll phrase it like this, which one of those things could you live without?
You know what? Because it's this machine and it's my main machine that I use all the time, and I will just iron out the bumps as I go, I probably wouldn't change anything. Now, if it was, say, for my wife or my kids, I absolutely would just simply give it more time. And I would wait until I could confirm that installing the drivers from the repository no longer required the beta drivers. That would have solved all my problems right there. Just having the drivers in the repository and calling it a day.
Okay. So letting it bake a little bit. Okay. So this brings us to your next challenge, which is Flatpaks. And that's of note because, look, a lot of distros are skating towards this as their end goal, right? And ListOS is doing this. It's a really solid immutable base, and the idea is that you add Flatpaks on top of it. Nick's book, which we talked about from Olympia Mike, is essentially a NixOS-based operating system that serves as a platform to install Flatpaks. The idea of Flatpaks is that it's totally separate, and you can just install them, and so it doesn't really matter what the base underlying distro is doing. They're still going to work. I learned something new this week, Steve. You taught me that there's actually different drivers that are loaded for Flatpaks. So tell me what broke in Flatpaks and about this separate driver spiel.
Yeah, so Flatpak actually will go, this is not an issue if you were on an Intel-only system, right? To be clear, because it would just pull in the Mesa driver, and the Mesa driver is the Mesa driver. But well, I guess you could run into a situation where you needed the latest Mesa driver, and then you might have the same problem. So I'll back up. When you install Flatpak, one of the things it does, especially if there's acceleration required, such as in Firefox or some of the Flatpaks that are based in, I'm drawing a blank. It's a web framework Electron. There you go. Some of the Electron apps also want access to your graphics system. And so because of that, Flatpak goes and downloads the NVIDIA driver, your AMD driver, whatever it is, and it extracts it to a place where they all can get at it. The problem with this is that, at least by default, if you just try and install it or update the NVIDIA drivers, it grabs, predictably, the main branch, which is what you want, except in my case where I'm running the beta drivers, it caused all kinds of weirdness because the beta drivers are required for this graphics card, and the Flatpaks were trying to use the regular driver that it went and grabbed helpfully for you. So that led me down the path of trying to figure out, how do I install the beta drivers? Again, it wasn't hard. This one was a quicker fix, and I'll use that in quotes, 20 minutes to sort it around. The GitHub is really well done, explains things very well. So that wasn't very difficult. However, I still have, so I just looked, I've got 46 Flatpaks on my system for various things, with one of them that I had to remove. And the issue that I ran into was one of them uses some library that was conflicting, as best as I could understand the output of the errors, with the beta driver. And so it just wouldn't launch. So the vast majority of my Flatpaks launched, but you know which one didn't? My two-factor authentication one, which is kind of critical. Can't just live without that one, especially because I tend to leave my phone who knows where. So I kind of need to have the desktop app available. So I had done install that and just grab it from the package manager. And I was off to the races. But if you're keeping score at home, this is Flatpak number 6 that I've had to remove for some various reason. I've had a Python conflict. I've had a driver conflict. I had, what was the other one? I had an issue where no matter what I could do, Make MKV would not find some of the files in my file system. I did Flat Seal and all the rest of that. Anyways, the point is like, this is supposed to make my life easier, and I've been slowly walking this back. I started off, at this point about 10 months ago, trying to do everything in Flatpak, and I've walked it back, and now, now I've got significantly less.
Do you think it'll eventually get there?
I think so. Well, part of this is some of the issues that I've had is because I'm living on the edge, right? Like, so the Python issue was absolutely an issue because I was not on, we'll say, a stable distribution. Like if I was on a RHEL or an Ubuntu LTS, I wouldn't have hit that issue. This driver one, this is because I went and bought some hardware that was brand new, right? Like less than a month old. So can I really fault Flatpak? The only thing really was the fight that I had with the MKV Flatpak. That was totally on a fight between my lack of knowledge of how to make it do a thing and it doing the thing I needed it to do. So I still think as a whole, you're probably not me and doing these crazy things, and it'll probably will work fine for you.
And as a whole, over time, are these things going to get worked out, you think, for most users?
I think that they probably mostly are. I don't think most users are buying a graphics card that is a month old or, updating their system Python to something that is brand new. I don't think most people are doing that.
If you had any advice for somebody going through the same thing, what would you tell them? Would you say just be patient? You said if you were to do it, it was for your wife, you would just exercise some patience. If it was another geek, would the advice be the same, or would you say maybe bounce around distros a little bit?
Yeah, it's hard to say because when I was kind of looking around how the other distros were solving this, Ubuntu 2504 was just like, add this PPA that's got the drivers and the kernel and all that sort of stuff, and you're golden. I think if you're okay with managing PPAs, that's a fine route to go. I think generally speaking, I've always been an N-1 type person, which means I'm not at the latest. I'll buy the graphics card before the latest, which is why I ended up with a 6-year-old graphics card to begin with, is because it wasn't the latest at the time, because I always let somebody else run into these first. But this time I thought, they're doing the open driver thing. I'm sure it'll be fine. And I guess it mostly is.
Do you want to get to some feedback?
Let's do it.
Our first email comes in today from Tony. Tony writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I was listening to your podcast number 440, and I liked learning about solar power. I was wondering what you think about using solar panels on the top of your vehicles. I have an old Ford pickup truck, and I was thinking of putting a solar panel on the roof and using that to power a 12-volt battery that I can use to charge some of my electronics without having to plug into my truck's electrical system. I was looking at the Goal Zero and the Flex 100i. That is $149.95, but it's currently sold out. Any ideas or thoughts?" So, couple of things here. As far as putting solar on a vehicle, I would tell you that I started with solar on, specifically on my RV before I started doing it ever for a church or for a paid project. So that's, I think, part of the issue, or I think that's been part of I highly support it. I think there's a couple things you've got to work through. I think the first is remember with the Goal Zero, you're buying a end solution. You're not really buying solar. I'm trying to move a different direction. So instead of buying individual, like a complete product, I'm trying to buy individual components, and then I'm trying to string them together, and I'm trying to put them together. The Goal Zero is kind of, you get what you pay for, but the idea is that you have to spend all the money right up front. So I think that's potentially problematic, or something that you'd want to keep in mind. The second thing is you got to make a decision if you're going to do 12 volt or 24 volt solar. And on smaller installations, like when I'm doing it for ham radio or for my camper, those things, I've kind of centered around the 12-volt systems. When I started to do it with for this project, I very quickly learned that everything has kind of standardized around 24 volts, and so I switched there. So it's not a huge thing. It just means that you're going to have to do a little bit of switching. Steve, do you have thoughts on smaller scale solar? Have you worked with that at all, or do you have thoughts of what you would do if you were going to dig into it?
I'd probably work with, especially on a truck or something like that, I would probably work with something like a Jackery. No. And then, so for people that don't know, a Jackery is kind of like it's a portable battery that you can attach solar panels to. And they have their own solar panels, and they support like up to, 6,000 watt peak hour, 6,000 watt peak. And part of the reason why I would think about this in particular is because if you got one of those boxes in the back of the pickup truck that you can lock up, then you don't have to worry about someone being a jerk and taking your panels or leaving the batteries out and making sure that it gets sealed for rain or anything like that. Because if you're talking about a pickup truck, there are some environmental considerations that may come into play. And I also like the idea of, like, if I'm going to invest money into doing this, I might want to be able to move it somewhere else, right? So that's what I would do if I was looking to do this without, buying an actual electric truck and using it as a generator.
Can you talk a little bit about built-in inverters versus having, like one inverter that converts everything there? You're putting microinverters in front of each panel.
So in general, there are two ways that you can have your inverters work, right? So if you've got a solar array and all the solar arrays are linked together, and then the power comes off the roof and then goes into an inverter, and then the inverter, maybe it's before or after the battery, that all depends on how your solar is, DC or AC or whatever. However, when you do it like that, what this means is if your panels get shaded in any way or obstructed, because they're all linked in series, the output of all of them decreases. Now, there are some really good solar panels and inverters out there that help to negate some of this, but you have to know what you're buying in order to do that. The flip side of that, and you lose some efficiency this way, is you have microinverters under each panel. And the reason why you would do this is each panel kind of stands on its own, which means that if you've got one panel that gets shaded or half of the panels in the series get shaded, you don't see the reduction in production across the entire board like you do if you have a single inverter. So for me personally, I ended up going with microinverters because the west side of my house has 3 giant trees that just depends on the time of the day, whether they're blocking some or all of the cluster of solar panels.
I see. And the other side of it, I would assume, is that if you have one inverter, that one inverter goes out, you're kind of stuck you're kind of hosed, as opposed with a microinverter, it's all coming back. And so any one panel, any one inverter can go out and you still have solar. Do I understand that right?
That is true. And the other, we'll say upside here is that if you're using microinverters, that means the power coming off of the roof is in AC, and anyone that you call to help you do electrical is familiar with AC, where you can't necessarily say that with high voltage DC coming off your solar panels.
Mm. Our second email comes in from William. William writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I work for a Native American tribe, and one of our tribal members discovered a cassette tape that has a recording of the tribe's last hereditary chief. This recording was from 1948, so at some point it was transferred from its original source to this cassette tape. My question to you is this: do you know of any professional services that can restore this recording to a quality digital format? I know the quality is already at a disadvantage, but anything will be better than relying on one cassette tape. Thank you for your time and for the show." So a couple of things here. I worked on a unique project back in college in which there was a tribe. It was actually in Canada, Steve, but there was a native tribe, and they have a specific dialect, a specific language that there's only a handful of people that still speak it. And so they sat down and they did recordings of this tribe and how they spoke and those sorts of things. So it's not dissimilar to what you're talking about. In that particular case, it was a whole project. My portion of the project was to photograph all of the original media, and then those were used as digital assets to link to as all of the audio was being digitized and all the rest of it. It's a long way to. If I were approaching this, there's two things I would consider. There are services, professional services that do that sort of thing. The difference between the guy who bought a cassette player off of eBay and made a really nice website and a true audiophile professional studio that really knows what they're doing is going to be extraordinarily difficult to judge across the internet. So I'm less inclined to tell you to go that route. What I might do if I woke up in your shoes, I might go approach some universities, maybe start with your own local university, but you can kind of work your way out and say, hey, this is kind of the thing that we're looking to do. This is something that's very important because there's two things here. One is the digitization, but the other is the preservation and being really careful with a completely irreplaceable asset. And so because of that, it adds a little extra layer of complexity, a little extra layer of care that I might stack on top of that. And so I might approach a local university. If you can't find anybody or you struggle to find anybody, I could certainly, the professor that supervised the project that I worked on, so far as I know, is still at the University of North Dakota, so I'd be happy to put you in touch with him, Dr. Timothy Pash. And then last, if you could give me some more details on exactly what kind of cassette it is. If it's just a typical audio cassette, that's something that Altispeed Technologies could even help you with, and we have the equipment to digitize those sorts of things. So, but what would keep me from getting involved in that, and really what would cause me to encourage you to go to a university is, again, the preservation and using equipment that's designed to be very delicate with something that's completely irreplaceable. We have high-quality audio players, high-quality cassette players, professional level cassette players, but they're just that. They're motorized and they're designed to just play cassettes and bring them in at the highest fidelity. They're not really designed to be, extraordinarily careful with the original media. I hope that helps. Steve, you have any thoughts? I suppose that's kind of out of your wheelhouse.
Well, actually, I was involved in a very large project in the gathering of information to canonize someone. So we knew a priest and they asked for help, and it happened to be that this person that they were working to canonize, they had, 20 or 30 cassette tapes, very, very old. I'm not sure how old the cassette tapes that this guy's talking about, that William's talking about, but they were also old. So I worked on a very similar thing, although we were not worried about playing them through once. And so we went and got the equipment and basically just we just played them, honestly, and sent the audio into something to capture the audio in a digital format because we weren't concerned about that.
So if you need help doing that, you need a company that would do that, just send an email to help@altispeed.com, and one of the Altispeed Techie Boys would be happy to help you take care of that. Music in our ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. We record this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. You can catch the entire back catalog at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Follow me, noahc.us. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. Ask Noah Show.